If the music of Lux Terminus was to have any motto or guiding principle for me, it would be that there are no limits. I've always been interested in writing music that is a reflection of everything I'm interested in as a musician, as a writer, performer, even as a human being. And the opportunity to have a band that is open to all of these possibilities is really a treasure for me as an artist.
I really think that the possibilities are limitless with this band. I think on this record show that we can go in many different directions, and so I hope that future recordings we continue to do the same thing. This record really shows that people in the progressive scene want to hear something new. They want to hear a unique approach to this music. We really try to add something new, and so it's just been so exciting to see that people have responded to that in a really positive way.
You know, and having two incredible musicians join me on this journey and add so much of their expertise and experiences to what we have to say together is really something special, I think. It's something that I've been tremendously excited about for 2 years, and the fact that the world finally gets to hear what we've been up to is tremendously exciting. You know, I've played in so many different bands over the years, and I've played so many different styles of music that I've always had an interest in, you know, music not defined by genres, but whatever speaks to me. And I've never understood why people get so tied into genres and this kind of tribe-like allegiance to a specific sound or a specific tradition. I just make what I want to make. And it's the first time in my musical career I've really allowed myself to do that.
When we started this album, it was definitely challenging, and I think that's a reflection of the fact that we were really trying to bring something new to this genre, especially since we didn't have a guitar player. You know, having that core keyboard bass trio that you might see in jazz ensembles, but really adding a progressive spin to it and a cinematic spin to it. That was definitely challenging, and trying to kind of find my place within that music was challenging at first.
One of the best parts about this album is that I do kind of get to use all of the previous techniques that I've learned, being the jazz combo, being in a blues band for a little bit. It's kind of nice not just playing one style, just hiding in the background the whole time, but getting to kind of show off a little bit throughout each song.
So it's been really special to have a project that allows me to do everything from cocktail jazz to gent, electro pop, ambient music, cinematic music. It doesn't matter with Lux Terminus, you know? If we want to do it, we'll do it. I think a big reason that Lux Terminus sounds the way it sounds is because of the way we came together as a band, which was back in 2016 when myself, along with Matthew Kirshner and Brian Kraft, were looking to play together. We wanted to play cocktail jazz, and we could play at restaurants and make a couple $100, and that would be it. So we learned a bunch of jazz standards, but we never actually played a cocktail jazz gig because I started writing original music, and very quickly the original music started to take a very different direction from the cocktail jazz origins we had. Very quickly we started writing music that became more and more progressive, more and more intense, heavier and heavier, and then all sorts of different influences found their way into the pot as well. Playing in Lux Terminus, writing for Lux Terminus, you know, really the sky is the limit. And I'm tremendously excited about where the future might take us.
When Matt and Vic first asked me to join this band, Matt was still away at law school, so Vic and I were getting together pretty regularly, going through all the material, and it was nice because we got to go through it like bit by bit and kind of just could go at my pace, essentially. By the time Matt was able to come up here with us, it was all pretty solid and it wasn't too hard to kind of piece everything together.
even my conducting could help.
I did hit the mark, right? Or was that too early?
You're perfect.
Oh, okay.
You didn't do it on
I
cue.
know. I need a more drastic cue.
But it's a pianissimo
I don't give
section.
a shit. You get drastic
Conducting
cue.
with dynamics.
I know.
I mean, there's things on this record that I've never done on any records. You know, I really try to dig deep down and add parts and flavors that I've never incorporated in other recordings that I've ever done. I'm Matt Koshner. I play drums in Lux Terminus. I've been playing drums since I was 4 years old, so we're going on almost 25 years at this point. So I've been playing drums my entire life, and I think Lux Terminus is very much in the genre of the music that I've been influenced by over my life.
I first got to know Matt Kirshner when he reached out to me to join a progressive metal band in the Cleveland area called Gravity. Matt is an astounding talent as far as precision, tone, touch, feel, all these intangible things that musicians all know they love about drummers. The drummer dictates the feel of the band in so many ways.
So I've played with Matt now for 12 years? 12 years. It's going to be 13. Wow, 13 years. And he is, and I'm not just like trying to boost his ego. He's the best drummer I've ever played with. I think the relationship that Matt and I have, how strong it is, really shows on the album, live performances. Like, we definitely have this kind of unspoken connection when we're playing, and it kind of makes for a really solid rhythm section. My name is Brian Kraft. I am the bass player for Lux Terminus. I've been playing bass since 2003, so I've been playing for almost 15 years now.
I've been playing with Brian Kraft now for over a decade, and we've done, I think, 4 full-length records together, including The Courage to Be, and it's just been really cool to see the progression in our playing together. You know, we always have tried to have a really solid rhythm section within the context of music that is often really progressive, really atmospheric.
Brian Kraft is a man of many talents, and all of them exceptional. He is a wonderful bass player. He's a very similar musician in many ways to Matt, mainly in that his pocket, time, and tone are just exceptional. His ability to find exactly where in the beat to place the notes is really remarkable. His work on the Courage to Be album cover is really incredible and is such a perfect encapsulation of the way I felt about the album and the themes that I wanted to project. You know, he's an incredible person to have in a band. My name is Vikram Shankar, and I am the keyboard player for Lux Terminus.
Vic and I have been playing together for almost 6 years at this point. I really feel like this album especially shows a really great back and forth between the keyboards and the drums. Vikram always brings so many interesting flavors to the music, and so as a drummer it's been really satisfying to feed off of that and then, you know, try to bring my own rhythmic approach to the music. And so together I think this record really showcases you know, a really good back and forth between all of the players.
So I still can't believe that Vic is, I think he's 23? I think he might be 24. He's a child, either way. And yet it blows my mind the things he's writing, the notoriety he's getting. It's all definitely warranted. The dude's a phenom. He's gonna make it big one day. Whether or not he takes us with him, I'm fine with that. But he's gonna be rocking out some big arenas at some point, and I'm just happy I get to come along for the ride right now.
I've been playing piano and keyboard since I was 6 or 7 years old. So really the vast majority of my life has been spent in front of this instrument or an instrument, but mainly the piano. I studied classical piano for 10 years when I was younger, and then I studied jazz piano and got my degree in film scoring. But alongside all this academic stuff, I was always taking in more modern, more progressive music, heavier music. I was always influenced by Herbie Hancock and McCoy Tyner, and I was always influenced by Rush and Dream Theater and Jordan Rudess. Musicians like Tigran Hamasyan, who is an incredible genius as far as I'm concerned, and a lot of electronic music. And all of this became part of the way I speak on the instrument. The concept of The Courage to Be was inspired greatly by the, at the time, long-distance relationship I had with my girlfriend, Laura Nolan. And in dealing with the concept of a long-distance relationship, of course, it has to touch on things like mental health and escapism and emotional ups and downs and all of these things that I think are very relatable to people. And something I really love about instrumental albums, instrumental music in general, is that you can put your own story to it. And because of that, I've been kind of hesitant to give away exactly what the tracks are about, exactly how they fit in the narrative of the story, because I want people to be able to put their own meanings. If this is all cinematic music, then you can set it to your own picture, your own narrative, which I find really, really special. I will say though that The Courage to Be is about the ways that when one is going through a long distance relationship, anything difficult, especially something difficult between two parties in a relationship, how you might cope with the difficulties of that relationship, the ways that you might draw strength, the different ways you might cope. Really, all the album is supposed to be is to say, there are very tough times, and life is difficult at times, sometimes profoundly difficult, but really life is worth living, and it's worth fighting through the darkness. And, all I want The Courage to Be to do is to shine a light in people's lives when they need it the most.
As far as the album art is concerned, Vic very much had an idea and a concept for what the album was about, and it was really important to me that came across in the artwork. And so we kind of bounced around a couple of ideas until we got the idea of like the silhouettes of two people on the album cover, and he kind of just let me go from there. And a couple dozen iterations later, you get the final product of the two figures kind of in their own spaces, and you kind of get like the tension and the distance that they feel between them. And even though they're back to back, they're almost a world apart.
We wanted to communicate the idea of distance. And distance, in this case, is physical, geographical distance, but I don't think it has to be physical distance. I think people can go through distance in their relationships that mean all sorts of different things, emotional, social, you have difficulty connecting after a while, all these things that are very human to experience in long relationships. And we communicated the idea of geographical distance through the juxtaposition of the cityscape versus the landscape, nature versus modernity. And that's reflected in the dichotomies of the music as well, between vintage and modern, and synthesized and organic. So really, the idea of The Courage to Be album cover is dichotomy. And I think Brian captured that brilliantly.
The recording session itself was very intense, at least from a drum perspective, for 2 days. I mean, we really just went in there and hammered all of the tracks down in 2 days, which there was that pressure, but at the same time, I think you can really hear the energy and the spirit of the live performance on the final record. For The Courage to Be, we recorded the drums with Jim Stewart, who is a really well-known producer and recording engineer in Cleveland. But I really think that he captured my drum sound the best on this record. I mean, we really painstakingly made sure that the drums had a really great tone. And so for this record, I really felt that I could really express myself. I didn't feel any limitations in terms of equipment. I didn't feel any limitations in terms of the sound. Jim really dialed in a great drum tone, and I'm really proud of how that turned out.
So recording The Courage to Be was by far the most, or I should say the least stressful experience I've ever had recording. We got to do it in Vic's studio, kind of a very nice, stress-free environment, and took our time, got everything just right, really honed in the sound using the dark glass, and it went really smoothly.
You gotta keep playing, bro. You gotta keep playing.
One of the bigger challenges was the fact that I really hadn't played in almost 2-3 years. Since the previous band broke up, I really had nothing going on as far as bass, and so it was almost just kind of not so much relearning the instrument, but getting kind of the muscle strength back. And there's a lot of little technical parts that require a little bit of endurance in the hands and fingers. That was especially in a 20-minute song like Courage, where you kind of have to power through at some points.
The recording process for The Courage to Be for me was almost a 2-year process, because from the very beginning of songwriting, where I was demoing into Logic Pro, I was demoing with as high quality sounds as I could and as high quality performances as I could capture. The songs were written quite quickly, but once they were written, I would keep going back to the demos. I listened to them obsessively. You know, I really went over the album with a magnifying glass by the time the whole thing was done. And I think what you get at the end of all that is that the keyboards are very layered and very intricate in a way that I don't think I could have captured if I did the album recording in a month or a few weeks, you know? One of the most exciting parts about making The Courage to Be was to have the opportunity to work with a diverse cast of different players and people to help me bring the vision to reality. This hook is sung on the Prologue by my girlfriend Lauren Nolan. You know, really beautiful vocal performance, ethereal, layered, I think 16, 20 layers of vocals. I wanted to achieve this Enya sound. And I've had a lot of people say that that vocal performance and that sound is some of the most beautiful stuff on the album. And frankly, I agree. I think Lauren did a marvelous job singing that stuff. That's a wrap.
Hey.
I believe. We brought in Timo Somers, my good friend from the Netherlands who plays in Delain, and phenomenal guitar player, really. Definitely one of the most underrated, because I think a lot of people in the metal community don't really know just how exceptional he is, just how much he has to say as a musician, also as a writer. So we had him play over the end of the title track of the album because I knew, I'd written this song that had a spot for an outro solo, or I should say a climax solo. A big, long, sprawling guitar solo is just such a classic way to be a climax for a long song. So I reached out to Timo and he did this incredible solo with so much feeling, so much space and vibe, yet very, very technical when it needs to be. So absolutely outstanding solo, and it gives me goosebumps, really, every time I hear it. And then on the same song, we had my friend Raphael Weinroth-Browne, an amazing Canadian cello player. I knew that the end of The Courage to Be had this string part that was going to involve some soaring high notes that have to sound very tender. So I reached out to him, and he did an amazing job. He's been super great to work with. I've actually worked with him since. Great guy, great player, and I'd totally work with him again, absolutely. And of course, on the final track of the album, we were blessed to have vocals from the amazing Anneke Van Giersbergen. I've been listening to her for so long, and I figured after all this listening, the perfect way to put an exclamation point on my fanboyism was to try and work with her, and I totally didn't expect anything to happen. But for some reason, she agreed to work with us, and she sings on this song, Epilogue Fly. And she took this song and she just made it so expressive and so beautiful, But I couldn't have anticipated just how much the song was transformed, the way she delivered it. With all the phrasing, all the ornamentations. So we're so humbled and so flattered to have her on this album, and it's been so amazing. The amount of people who've been struck by that song, who say that that song means a lot to them. I mean, couldn't say enough positive things about what Anneke Van Giersbergen brought to this album. The song Electrocommunion was the last song I wrote for The Courage to Be, and I wrote it mainly because I felt like the album needed this shot of adrenaline, this energy surge that I thought Electrocommunion could provide. And I was inspired a lot by Vince DiCola and electronic musicians like Squarepusher and Pendulum, as well as Haken and Pliny and all of the usual suspects as far as modern prog goes. This whole song was just supposed to be embracing the cheese and give you a silly smile on your face. And I think it does that as well as anything I've ever written, in my life. Electrocommunion also has some of the most technically challenging music of the whole album, and some very shreddy passages and some very difficult rhythmic passages, such as this part towards the end of the song, the breakdown section, which is this crazy 13/32 against 4/4 breakdown thing. It's the part that goes. I remember when I sent the sheet music to Matt because I had to transcribe that part. It was so tricky. I think I emailed it to him, and I think the message text of my email was just sorry because it's such a challenging part, and more to the point, it was not something Matt had really ever done before. And to Matt's credit, there's a lot of music on this album that is very different from anything he's ever done. So I threw stuff like this. And the verse of Effusion is another example of these very difficult polymeters. And man, he killed it. I was so surprised and so pleasantly surprised at how well he handled all these very difficult meters. And Electrocommunion, for my vote, is probably the most impressive drum performance on the album. The song Aberration was a transitional song for me, really, because I believe it was the third song I wrote for the album, and it was right in that spot while we were transitioning our identities from jazz trio over to instrumental prog rock, prog metal thing. And so Aberration was written right in that transitional period. And it's very heavy and it has a lot of genty rhythms, but It has a harmonic approach that I intentionally made quite weird and quite daring. That was my idea when I went into it, was to have a song that just harmonically follows almost no logic. For instance, the verse has this chord progression and everything's over a B pedal tone. And I believe that's the only reason these chords really work. And the voice leading is very smooth as well between the notes, but you have this verse progression that is really weird. And then I love this chorus that comes after that. It's one of my favorite choruses on the album. Not because it's a sing-along-y chorus or anything, but the chords are, quite weird. Because there really is no tonic. There is no home really for this chorus. It's always searching. It's always trying to find something new. It's always trying to find home, and then home gets pulled out from under you. And if you think about what the album means thematically, you might get an idea of what I'm trying to say, maybe metaphorically, with the way these chords work. But it has this chord progression that is quite strange. And at that point you think that you know how this chorus goes, but then we go up a half step. We've moved from B minor basically to D flat major, which is quite an unrelated key. The other cool part of that song for me is the breakdown section. And this is one of the few parts on the album that I wrote on guitar, actually. And that, of course, is this section. I wrote that riff kind of thinking of the band Intronaut. A really cool part of that song, Aberration, that I'm very proud of. In the middle of the album, we have this set of very jazz-inspired tunes, Miles Away and Spectral Shapes. And these were the first two songs we wrote for the album. And we wrote this song, Miles Away, I think in one of our first jam sessions together. The idea of this song was, it was very inspired by Miles Davis and Miles Davis's 70s fusion work. But the inspiration goes one level deeper, because I was fortunate a couple years ago, to play a couple of gigs with a saxophone player named Sam Morrison, who played with Miles Davis in the 1970s for a period of time. Sam Morrison had this song that Miles Davis wrote, and we played it on our gigs together, and it's unreleased. It's a Miles Davis composition that he only played live for a short period of time. And it's a very fast fusion song, and I don't remember exactly how it goes, to be honest, but I remember the character. And I was very inspired by that character when I wrote Miles Away, to the point where I think I might have actually ripped off a couple licks or something. It almost got cut from the album, interestingly enough, because we felt that our identity had shifted towards modern prog, but this song was kind of stuck in the 70s. Thankfully, we decided to keep the song of the album and update the arrangement. And so that's where all the synthesizers and all that stuff came into play. And the tempo was upped 10 BPM to make it an absolute nightmare for Matt to record. And it has great bass work, phenomenal drum work. I mean, there were some fills that actually made us laugh out loud when he did them, because we were like, whoa, where did that come from? So Miles Away is a very unique song on the album, and I'm glad that it retained its place on the album, because it shows our heritage, it shows where we started out, and it's kind of a moment in time in that regard. And then right after Miles Away is the second song we wrote for the album, which is the song Spectral Shapes. It's a pretty typical, dark jazz arrangement, I think, where we have this. song has this very, ghostly character, which is of course where the name Spectral Shapes comes from. And it also has this cool moment towards the end where we go out of time, because I recorded that song live with Matt. So what I did is Matt was set up, and then in another room I had an upright piano. It's the only song on the album where we did this. And I played upright piano along with him while he was playing, and I pushed him in different ways, In that outro section, maybe I do something like... and hit a lot of weird, accents and stuff, because I wanted to get him to start coloring around the beat. And then what I did after the fact is I went home to my home studio and I re-recorded what I played, a little bit tighter with a better sound, perhaps. But what's captured on the recording of Spectral Shapes is this interplay and this very organic feel in between the musicians, which I think is something special for the album. And it's not something you hear a lot on prog recordings, prog metal, prog rock recordings. That sense of improvisation and that elastic approach to rhythm. I think it's a cool interlude piece. Effusion was an early song I wrote for the album, and Effusion is intended to be one of these high energy pieces that accompanies Electrocommunion. It has a lot of moving parts, a lot of 16th notes. I mean, it's probably the most tiring song to play aside from the 20-minute song, just in terms of stamina. I was conceiving of this kind of Tigran Hamasyan, Dirty Loops kind of jazz fusion rock with a twist sort of vibe. So it has this verse. I mean, if you listen to it enough, it becomes second nature, of course, but when I first presented it to the guys, I think it was probably the first significant challenge I presented them with while I was presenting them song ideas. And of course, it's this idea. Right, it's that idea. And then after every 4-4-4-4-4-4-3-16, it repeats. So these accents get quite strangely displaced. And if you want to add all that up and sound pretentious, you could call it 51-16, which I sometimes do as a laugh. I mean, I don't think I'd ever write it out on paper as 51-16. But that's the length of the repetition. Effusion also has a chorus that I enjoy quite a bit. I wrote this chorus melody, and for me it was kind of a throwaway chorus melody. And then I think it was Matt who said that it was one of his favorite melodies on the album. And we ended up keeping it and fleshing it out. But it's this melody. It's the one... So that melody ended up becoming probably one of the strongest parts of the song, and it was really just a throwaway piece to begin with. So Effusion's a cool track with a lot of energy and a lot of technically showboating moments that I think is a lot of fun to play live, especially. It has this great energy that gets people moving, which I think is killer. The Courage to Be is the title track of the album, and more than that, it was originally the title track of the band, because we used to call this song Lux Terminus. That's actually where I came up with that name. I really wanted to see if I could write one song, instrumental, that tells one story. And so I wrote it like that. There was one weekend in September 2016 where I sat down and I had these ideas. All I went into it having was I had this... which of course reappears 3 times in the song. And then I had this idea, which is how the full band kicks into the arrangement. This this 7/8-4/4 idea, I guess. And beyond that, I just started in the beginning. I started with the swell, and then I had this idea, and then I wrote the entire song that way in 2 days. And then I demoed it out on Logic, and that was it, you know? I didn't really change the structure of the song after that, really at all, I think. It has many of the musical ideas I'm most proud of on the album. One of them is that melody, which of course reappears, played by Raphael Weinroth-Browne at the very end of the song. And that's probably one of the most musically beautiful moments on the album because of his contribution. I mean, the way he played that part is just so lovely. But I also have a very strong attachment towards this part. And the chord progression for me feels like it's always trying to search somewhere. It's a very directional chord progression, and it's always striving to find home. That is such a big part of the emotional thrust of this album, is searching for home and searching for belonging and happiness and peace. So that chord progression is very special to me, and that's why I asked Timo Somers to play on the repetition of the chord progression towards the end of the song, because I knew that the song had to go somewhere special, and I knew that he was going to be the one to take it there. So the idea of The Courage to Be was to feel very organic, to feel like it's connected to everything that came before it and everything that comes after it. And stylistically, it's supposed to be that way too, because it has moments that are very vintage and very old school, moments that are classical, moments that are very modern with, shrieking synths and stuff like that. So The Courage to Be really is kind of a mission statement of the album, kind of the band as well. And it's a song that I'm very, very proud of. It's a very special song to me, yeah. The Fly Suite is a collection of 4 songs scattered throughout the album that kind of tells the emotional story of the album, or it at least summarizes the key emotional points of what I'm trying to say with the album. It started with parts 2 and 3, The Journey and The Road Home. And The Journey was one of those early songs we wrote that was very influenced by the cocktail jazz environment that we thought we were going to be playing in at the time. And it has this cycling sequence of chords in 11/8 that reminds me a lot of Tigran Hamasyan. This we go into this chorus of very lush harmonies that is intended to be, have a twist to it, but feel very warm and comforting almost. But then we upgraded it with these more intense rhythm section figures, which I think are really cool. And it has some of my favorite drumming from Matt on the entire album. I mean, the verse groove and the chorus groove, this very creative, pocket-based, but hitting so many accents along the way. I mean, really, really cool drum work on that song. I think it's probably some of Matt's finest drumming. And then, of course, we go from The Journey to The Road Home, which was another early song we wrote for this album. And you can very much tell, I think, that The Road Home comes from a cocktail jazz background, because the first half of this song is very much in that frame, I'm thinking, when I'm playing that, I'm thinking of a warm fireplace, a cup of tea, you know? And in terms of the narrative, of course, it means something specific to my life and, you know, maybe ways that I would try to spend my time coping with the things that I was coping with. The song undergoes a transition midway through, which is one of my favorite moments on the album, when we take this cocktail jazz thing and then we kind of seamlessly transition it into Olafur Arnold's cinematic expressive. The concept of it came from Matt and an idea he had with these 4 cycling chords that repeat over and over again and then a rhythmic figure on the top. And then I turned that into, of course, that's kind of one of the themes of the album, and it comes in many guises, in the prologue and the epilogue, of course, and it's a very special chord progression to me. One of these chord progressions that I feel is always searching and always trying to find its way home, and I find that really beautiful. The prologue and the epilogue of the record were tracks that came later. I was realizing that this concept I had to say, you know, required a voice, and it required lyrics to really express what I was trying to say. And of course, the epilogue exists because of Anneke Van Giersbergen and her incredible vocal performance, which really encapsulates what this album is all about to us. But this song is kind of a combination of the journey and the road home. It's like a mashup / reinvention with vocals. And so it begins with, if you listen to these chords, which obviously is the journey chords. And then Anneke sings this beautiful melody on top of it. This comes, of course, from the bass melody of The Journey that Brian plays, and it's another example of serendipity and the original inspiration proving to be very important in the long run. Because that bass melody I wrote in The Journey was completely a placeholder. I wrote it because I knew I wanted a bass melody, and I just threw together something. And then it turned up becoming the verse melody line sung by my favorite singer for my favorite song I've ever written. The song in general, of course, is coming from the perspective of the long-distance relationship and what it feels like to watch someone come into your life and then leave your life because they have to, and then how do you come to terms with that? How do you grapple with this never-ending roller coaster of highs and lows? That chorus of the song is a little bit more general. It's zoomed out, and it's a little bit more about mental health in general. It's a statement of resolve on my part that no matter how dark things will get, I always will choose life, of course. And, you know, that's probably a personal mission statement, and one that I put into music hoping that other people would be able to relate to it and draw strength from it. A big part of why I love this song so much is the outro of the song, where we take this melody, which I kind of call it the fly hook. And then, of course, that fly hook goes into this beautiful outro solo, which is Anneke's own melodies that she wrote for two voices. And it really is so much more of an emotional climax than anything I could have come up with. And I wrote the orchestral arrangement behind it just to support that climax, because it contains some of my favorite arcs and melodies and phrasing that I think I've ever heard. Really special song and really special moment in my life to be able to write this song and record it, painstakingly mix it, and finally have the world hear it. The message of the Fly Suite for me is it's a depiction of what it feels like to be in a long-distance relationship and always be yearning, always be searching for something more, always be searching for home, for happiness. And the same thing from a mental health perspective. You know, what it always feels like to be searching for happiness and feeling grounded. And ultimately, to make the resolve to carry on because, you know, life is ultimately worth it. And life is ultimately beautiful. And it's the strength that we get from the loved ones around us and our friends and our family, music, art. And we can draw strength from all these things and resolve to make a better world and live the best that we can. Fly is ultimately supposed to be a story about hope and triumph and transcendence. And, you know, it's a very personal story to me.
This has been a really exciting experience so far. You know, it's been incredibly exciting and humbling, all the support we've received from people throughout the world. It really seems like people are really getting something out of this record and feel an emotional connection to it, which is really exciting.
To be able to touch people the way that I know we've touched people is absolutely incredible. Because all I want to ever do is help people and motivate people to keep living their lives in the best way they can. And the fact that I know we've already been able to do that for some people is surreal, really. I mean, this album is so personal to all of us. You know, it represents 2 years of our lives. It's so amazing that it's connected with people the way it has.
It's because, again, you know, our goal going into this was to bring something new to the table. It's been really exciting to see that listeners, really from around the world, have responded to that. And, you know, we've had some really great press so far. And people just coming up to us at shows and at different, you know, experiences, and really just saying how the album's touched them has been really rewarding as a musician.
And man, I just have to thank all the people who have listened to this album, the people who have bought the album, streamed it, bought a shirt, bought a hoodie, told their friends, come to a show, you know, written articles about us. The amount of feedback we've gotten and the amount of support we've gotten is so humbling, and it means the world to all of us. So yeah, I just have to thank everybody who's supported us, who's joined us on our journey so far and plans to stay on our journey as we continue through our career.